In this video, I'll show you how to create the sound of a... I'll show you how to create the sound of a helicopter. In fact, I'll show you 2 ways to create the sound of a helicopter using any synthesizer, hardware or software, providing it has a noise generator. Now, it is a fairly simple patch. If you've dabbled in subtractive synthesis, you're probably way ahead of me and you'll probably know how to set this up anyway. But it's a good fun patch and it's fun to twiddle the dials and to see what changes you can make to the sound. Now, a short while ago I made a video about the EMS Synth in a suitcase, and I said how disappointed I was because the sound which the guy who was playing it produced was the sound of a helicopter. If you want to check that out, card up there, link in the description. But I actually have a piece of music, not completed yet unfortunately, which uses the sound of a helicopter as a sort of backdrop. So I thought this was a good patch and a good video to make at this time. I'm using the Moog Grandmother, which you can see in the corner there. So let's get started and go see Grandma. So this is the Moog Grandmother. I will explain the principle so you can use it on any synthesizer, and then I will show you the exact setup to use on the Grandmother. Now, I'm using the Grandmother, well, because I have one, but also because the layout is very simple. It's very easy to follow. It is a semi-modular synthesizer, but it is hardwired, and the signal paths runs from left to right. So we have the oscillators, there's a mixer section, a filter and an ADSR section. I'll show you 2 ways to make this helicopter sound. The first one, we use the noise source, run it through the filter and modulate the filter with the LFO section. That's basically it. So let's see how we do this on the Grandmother. This is a mixer section. The Grandmother has some 2 oscillators. We'll turn them down for the moment. This is the noise. So we'll turn the noise right up. Now, if you press a key, we can hear noise. The ADSR is set to fast attack, fast decay, full sustain, no release. So as soon as you press a key, we get the noise. But the Grandmother has a drone mode. So if your synth has a drone mode or a hold mode, you can flick that on and mess around with the settings without having to keep one hand on the keyboard. So we'll do that. And there's the noise. So the filter cut off. If we turn that down, we lose all the noise. So hopefully my voice will carry over this. We don't want the full signal going through because it's a little bit too toppy and a bit too hissy. So if we move the cut off to maybe halfway, and then we set the rate to, we'll set that to about halfway, and on the Grandmother you can route the LFO section to the pitch or the filter. So obviously you want to use the filter, so we'll set that to about halfway as well. And then to activate the modulation on the Grandmother, at least we increase the modulation wheel, and there we have a sort of a helicopter sound. So now we need to fine tune it, and we can do this using the rate knob and the cutoff. So the rate obviously controls the speed of the rotors, and the cutoff controls the frequency. Now, if we just apply a small amount, we get a very low throb, which might sound like a helicopter in a distance. So it's up to you how fast the rotors go and how much of a helicopter rotor noise sound you want. Now, at the moment, the Grandmother has a reverb section. This is absolutely down to 0. There's no reverb on this at all. So all that's happening here is that the oscillator, the low frequency oscillator, I should have mentioned this is set to a triangle wave. So use a triangle or a sine wave. So all that's happening is the low frequency oscillator is opening the cutoff filter. Now if we switch this off, just to absolutely demonstrate what's happening, essentially the LFO is doing this. which is not something which is easy to do manually. So the LFO essentially is opening and closing the cutoff filter. Let's turn that up again. Now, you will probably find, at least on the Grandmother, that this is the amount of the LFO which is going to the filter. You can probably turn this up full. If you turn it down, this lowers the amount of the LFO which is being applied to the filter. It loses it doesn't actually cut off the sound. It just sort of modulates, so we get a lot of noise into it. So this is one of the settings you can adjust. And the rate, of course. And the cutoff will determine how much noise is added to the rotor blades. So that sounds reasonable to me. Now there's one more thing we can do here, and that is to add in an actual oscillator, a pitch. So on the Grandmother, this is oscillator 1, this is set to 32 feet. This is the mixer section. So we'll just add a little bit of oscillator 1. And this is set to a sine wave. But you can try different waveforms. I think this works quite well. This one works well as well. And this adds a sort of a low thrum to the sound, which I think this adds to the realism. It does add a pitch. It does add a bit of a pitch. It's a slow thrum. It's a very mechanical, very noisy helicopters, apparently. I haven't actually been in one, but I've been close to one when the rotors were spinning. Very noisy machines. So again, this is something you can add to suit. So I think that sounds a nice sort of thrummy sound. Now, because we are adding an oscillator with a pitch, you will find that you can play the pitch on the keyboard. Now, personally, I don't like this high noise for the helicopter sound, so I would play a note somewhere down here just to get this low thrumming sound. Now, one of the things you can do, obviously, is to change the controls in real time. So I'll just switch this off for now, and just before I do that, right, so by adjusting the cutoff frequency and the rate, you can create the impression of a helicopter, the rotors spinning round and taking off. So we'll just turn up the filter and then increase the rate. Something like that. I'm going to switch the drone off. Now, at the moment, the ADSR is set to, it's essentially an organ. An organ patch. The sound is either on when you hold the key down or off when you release the key. So one of the interesting things you can do, if we increase the attack speed, sorry, not increase it, decrease it, turn the attack to make a very slow attack, and increase the release speed. So what will happen now is the sound will fade in, and then when you release the key, it will fade out again. So we get this sort of effect. So that's the helicopter coming in closely, maybe flying around overhead and then disappearing. That's a long release phase. So you can create that sort of effect. Let's put this back. And one of the other things you can do, you can add reverb. Now, this reverb has been on 0 so far. Reverb, well, it adds a reverberation effect. Now, the Grandmother has a built-in spring reverb, and I have to say, I don't think this is the best reverb for a helicopter sound. But when you add reverb to a sound, it usually pushes the sound further back. So in the case of the helicopter, you would imagine the helicopter is further away. So let's try that. I'll put the drone on again. So you can hear the reverb, the spring clicking in. It is sort of, you can hear it's a springy reverb. It's a bit of a metallic sound. I shall turn it all the way up now. So so the rotors have disappeared there. It's an interesting drone sound, but I'm not sure that is particularly effective in pushing the sound back. It creates sort of metallic sound. It may give the impression that the helicopter is flying down a canyon, but if you are using this as a background for something, if the chances are most people will use a DAW for the final part of the recording, so you can add a different type of reverb in your DAW. And another effect which you might want to experiment with, again in your DAW, because the Grandmother doesn't have this effect, is flanging, and that can add a sort of subtle swirling sound to the rotor blades. So that is something to experiment with. Now, another thing, the final thing, before we get on to the second way of creating this sound, is to create a pan effect. So the helicopter seems to fly from left to right or right to left, or spins around above your head. Now, the Grandmother is a monophonic synthesizer, so I don't have a pan effect, but in a DAW, you can create a pan effect quite easily. Right, let's look at another way to create a helicopter effect. So we'll switch the modulation off here, and we'll remove the LFO from the cutoff frequency, and we need a patch cable for this. On another synthesizer, the idea is to patch the low frequency oscillator directly into the amplifier to create a sort of tremolo effect. So I have found this ridiculously long patch cable, and the best way to use this on the Grandmother, I think, is to use the wave output from the LFO and plug it into the ADSR trigger in. I shall move that cable out of the way. So the LFO is triggering the ADSR envelope, so you don't need to press anything at all. It just happens. You don't need the drone switch on, anything at all. I'm just using the volume control to turn the volume down. So essentially it's just pulsing the ADSR envelope, and it works in the same way. You control the speed of the rotor with the rate and the frequency with the cutoff control. So that's and then you can mess around with the controls as you wish. Add a little bit of reverb, fly down the Grand Canyon with metal walls. Right, unplug that. So there you are. So that's two ways to create this helicopter sound, and as always, the essence of sound design on a synthesizer is to fiddle with the controls and see what happens. So I hope you enjoyed this and found it fun and are encouraged to go and set this up on your synth. Now, I didn't go into it here, but using a similar sort of setup, you can create the sound of a train, and using white noise and various filtering techniques, you can create the sound of waves lapping on the shore and rain and various atmospheric effects. If you've enjoyed this video, perhaps you'd like to consider subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell. Thank you. So YouTube will tell you when I post new videos. It's all about synthesizer and electronic music, good, interesting stuff like that. And if you have enjoyed this video, especially if you have a Moog Grandmother, I think you might enjoy these videos as well. As always, thank you very much indeed for spending time with me watching my videos. I will see you again in the next one.